When I met Vanessa, she seemed like everything I could ever want in a partner, confident, charming, and bursting with energy. She had this undeniable presence, the kind that naturally drew people to her in a crowd. At the time, I thought her vibrant, outgoing nature was one of her best traits. Looking back now, I wasn't so sure. Our marriage didn't start off this way. In the beginning, we felt like equals, partners who shared what I believed was genuine love and respect. While I put all my effort into building my business from nothing, Vanessa brought warmth and a kind of charisma that lit up our home. We seemed to complement each other perfectly, or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. But over the past year, things started to change. At first, the changes were so minor, they were easy to overlook. Vanessa seemed more distant than usual, and I assumed it was just stress. She'd started volunteering at a local art gallery, and I figured the long hours and new responsibilities were taking a toll on her. Then came the late nights, the vague explanations, the quick, almost dismissive apologies when she missed dinner or didn't show up at all. I remember the first time I confronted her about it. It was a Tuesday night. She came home hours later than she'd said she would. Her makeup was smudged, her hair smelled faintly of cologne I didn't recognize, and I could feel my chest tightening as I tried to stay calm. "Where were you?" I asked. "With Cameron," she said casually, tossing her purse onto the couch like it was no big deal. "We grabbed drinks after the gallery meeting. I told you about it, didn't I?" She hadn't. I was certain she hadn't. When I pointed it out, she just rolled her eyes and brushed me off. "You're being ridiculous, Daniel. He's just a friend. Why do you always jump to the worst conclusions?" And that became her go-to response. "He's just a friend." Anytime her excuses didn't add up, that's what she'd say. I wanted to believe her. I told myself I was overthinking things, that my suspicions were just my own insecurities getting the better of me, but the signs were hard to ignore. Her phone was always face down when she set it on the table. She started having an endless string of meetings and events that never seemed to end on time, and the way she talked about Cameron, her face would light up, her voice a little too animated as she went on about his humor, his taste in music, or his perspective on art. It was like watching her come alive for someone else. One evening, I finally asked her directly, "Vanessa, are you seeing someone else?" Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't get defensive or angry. Instead, she laughed, a dismissive, almost mocking laugh. "Daniel, do you even hear yourself? Cameron is just a friend. Why would you even think that?" I couldn't give her a solid answer, at least not one that wouldn't make me sound like I was grasping at straws. But the way her lips curled into a faint smile when she said his name, the way her eyes softened, made my stomach turn. Still, I let it go. What choice did I have? I had no proof, just a nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Vanessa was good at making me doubt myself. She knew just how to say the right things to make me second-guess my own instincts. But the doubts didn't go away. They only grew. Her behavior became harder and harder to overlook. She started dressing differently, with a sharper, more polished style that I didn't recognize. Her laugh, once so warm, felt distant, like it wasn't meant for me anymore. The little gestures that used to bring us closer, the way she'd reach for my hand when we walked or ask about my day, were gone. Our conversations turned flat, reduced to schedules and surface-level small talk. I dreaded the nights when she'd come home late, her hair carrying the faint scent of a cologne I knew wasn't mine. I hated waking up in the mornings to find her already gone, her phone buzzing with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. But most of all, I hated the sense of helplessness that had settled into my chest. I tried to bring it up again, more directly this time. "Vanessa, I feel like we're drifting apart. Is there something you're not telling me?" Her answer was dismissive, almost patronizing. "Daniel, you're imagining things. Maybe you should focus on work instead of worrying about what I'm doing all the time." Work, that was always her solution, and in a way, she wasn't wrong. My business was the only thing that still felt steady, the one area of my life where I had any control. But even that started to slip as my doubts and frustrations took over. By the time Cameron's name became a regular point of tension in our arguments, I'd stopped asking questions altogether. What was the point? Every time I mentioned him, she turned it around on me, accusing me of being controlling, insecure, or paranoid. I thought about hiring a private investigator, But that felt like a line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Once I did that, there'd be no coming back. So instead, I kept my suspicions locked away, tried to focus on whatever was still salvageable in our marriage, even if there wasn't much left. But deep down, I knew the truth. I could feel Vanessa slipping further and further away, and the worst part was, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to hold on anymore. Might be she was right. Might be I was imagining things, or might be I already knew exactly what was happening. But I wasn't ready to face it yet. The night of the party felt like a breaking point. A moment where everything would finally come to light one way or another. Before I even stepped inside, something felt off. It was as if the air itself was thick with tension, like the whole world was holding its breath waiting for something to give. This wasn't just any party. It was Steven's annual gala, a grand event hosted by one of my business partners. These evenings were the pinnacle of high society. Glitzy, extravagant, were the pinnacle of high society. Affairs where everyone seemed to be playing a game of one-upmanship. Vanessa had been unusually excited about this one. She spent days obsessing over her outfit, eventually choosing a sleek black dress that fit her like a glove. She'd gone all out, scheduling a salon appointment, meticulously perfecting her makeup, and even splurging on those designer heels she'd been admiring for weeks. Watching her get ready, I was struck by a memory of the woman I fell in love with, the one who could effortlessly command attention wherever she went, but her excitement felt different this time. It wasn't for me, and I knew it. By the time we arrived, Vanessa was practically glowing with energy. She stepped out of the car like she was walking onto a stage, her confidence radiating in every direction. I followed her inside, my stomach already tied in knots. The party was everything you'd expect. Soft jazz playing in the background, glasses of champagne making their rounds, and people laughing just a little too loudly. Vanessa wasted no time slipping into the crowd, moving from one conversation to the next like the social butterfly she was. I hung back, nursing a drink and nodding politely to acquaintances. This was Vanessa's world, not mine, and I had long since learned it was better to let her shine on her own. That's when I saw him, Cameron. He was leaning against the bar with the kind of casual confidence that demanded attention. His posture was relaxed, but there was something deliberate about the way he carried himself, like he enjoyed knowing eyes were on him. His laugh was loud, his smile easy, and his gaze, it was locked firmly on Vanessa. The moment she saw him, her face lit up in a way that hit me like a punch to the gut. She made a beeline for him, her steps quick and eager. I watched frozen as he leaned in to greet her, his hand resting lightly on her back. The way they interacted, close, familiar, made my chest tighten. I couldn't hear their words, but their body language told me everything I needed to know. I wanted to go over there, to interrupt them and remind Cameron who she was married to, but I couldn't move. Whether it was pride or fear, something kept me rooted in place. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd see up close, or maybe I was starting to realize that I wasn't even a part of this equation anymore. For the next hour, I stayed on the sidelines, my eyes glued to them, drifted through the room together, talking, laughing, and leaning in close. Their connection was undeniable, and Vanessa barely even glanced in my direction. It felt like I was watching someone else's life unfold, a life where I didn't belong. At one point, Jessica, a close friend of Steven's who knew us both well, approached me. Her cheerful demeanor didn't quite hide the concern in her eyes. "Vanessa seems to be having a great time," she said, nodding toward her and Cameron. There was a note of caution in her voice, as if she was trying to gauge my reaction. I forced a smile. "She always does," I replied, but the words felt bitter in my mouth. Jessica hesitated, then placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Daniel, Issaka, everything okay between you two? I've noticed some tension lately." I appreciated her concern, but I wasn't ready to discuss the state of my marriage in the middle of a crowded party. "We're fine," I lied. "Just busy with work and everything." She gave me a look that everything said. She didn't believe me for a second, but was kind enough not to push. "Well, if you ever need to talk, I'm here." Sometimes an outside perspective helps. I nodded gratefully, but my attention had already drifted back to Vanessa and Cameron. "Great time." That's how she described it, wasn't it? "Fun." Harmless fun with a friend, but there was nothing harmless about the way her hand lingered on Cameron's arm or the way his eyes followed her. The moment everything came crashing down happened later in the evening. I had moved closer to the bar, looking for something strong enough to dull the frustration boiling inside me. While I waited for my drink, I caught snips of their conversation. "You look incredible tonight," Cameron said, his voice low and smooth. Vanessa laughed softly, the sound hitting me like a memory of better days. "Stop it. You're going to make Daniel jealous." "Am I?" Cameron replied, his tone dripping with amusement. "He doesn't seem to mind. Or might be he's used to it by now." My hand tightened around my glass. Used to it. The arrogance of those words was infuriating. But what gutted me was Vanessa's response. She smirked, leaning closer to him. "Daniel's harmless. He knows this is just friendly." Friendly. That word sliced through me, sharp and unrelenting. After months of doubts and gaslighting, it felt like the final twist of gaslighting. The knife. I could feel the weight of curious stares from those nearby and hear the quiet murmurs that trailed behind Vanessa and Cameron wherever they went. The humiliation was suffocating. For the first time, I felt like I didn't just not belong at this party. I didn't belong in her life. Eventually, Vanessa's eyes met mine across the room. For a brief second, I thought I saw something there. Guilt, concern, might be just irritation that I was still standing there watching. Ride home was unbearable. My silence filled the space between us, heavy and unrelenting. Vanessa, on the other hand, acted like everything was perfectly normal. She talked about the people she'd met, the conversations she'd had. Her voice light and carefree. It was maddening. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "I saw the way he looked at you," I said, my voice steady but low. Her response was immediate, sharp, and unapologetic, and I liked it. "What are you going to do about it?" Her words hit me like a hammer. The sheer callousness of them, the complete lack of remorse, was staggering. She didn't even bother to deny it. That was it, the last crack in a foundation that had been falling apart for months. I stared at her, searching for any sign of regret, any hint that she cared about what she had just done. There was nothing. The woman I married still existed somewhere, buried deep beneath the surface, but all I could see now was defiance in her eyes. After a long pause, I finally spoke, my voice steady and cold, matching the hollow ache in my chest. "If he wants you, he can have you. I don't waste my time fighting for something worthless." She didn't say anything, and the silence that followed hit harder than any argument could have. By the time I pulled the car into the driveway, my decision was final. This wasn't a temporary rough patch or something we could fix with apologies. This was the end. And I think deep down, Vanessa knew it too. The morning after the party, I woke up feeling oddly clear-headed. It wasn't peace, not even close, but for the first time in years, I knew exactly what needed to happen. No yelling, no dramatic scenes, just a calm, calculated resolve to reclaim my life. Vanessa was still asleep when I got out of bed. I paused in the doorway for a moment. Looking at her, she looked so peaceful, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just destroyed everything we'd built together. It was almost cruel how someone could seem so calm while leaving someone else in shambles. I tried to feel something, anger, sadness, regret, but I was empty. She drained me completely. I went downstairs, sat at my desk, and at my desk, opened my laptop. Over the next few hours, I unraveled every tie that bound us together. Bank accounts, credit cards, investments, anything we shared, I closed or transferred to my name. I wasn't going to leave her with a dime. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. Vanessa had made her choices, and I wasn't going to fund her next chapter with Cameron or whoever else she thought would take my place. Once the financial ties were cut, I started packing. I didn't take much, just clothes, toiletries, and a few personal items. Everything else could stay. The house wasn't mine anymore. It was just a hollow reminder of lies and betrayal, and I couldn't stay there another second. Before leaving, I wrote a short note and left it on the kitchen counter. It wasn't emotional, just blunt and to the point. "You wanted him. Now you've got him. Good luck." When Vanessa finally came downstairs, I was sitting on the couch with my bags by the door. She froze when she saw them, her expression shifting between confusion and irritation. "What's this supposed to be?" she snapped. "I'm leaving," I said, my tone flat. There was no need to soften it. Her eyes narrowed. You're seriously walking out over one stupid comment? That's pathetic. Daniel, grow up. I laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from humor. It was bitter, empty, and even surprised me. Home. The way you treated me like I was too blind to see what was going on. You think I don't know about Cameron, or whoever else? Her face darkened, and she crossed her arms. Cameron is just a friend, and you're overreacting. I stood up, grabbing my bags. Save it. I've had enough of your lies. If you need to believe your own story to sleep at night, fine. But I'm done. For the first time, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. It was as if she was realizing this wasn't just another fight. You're really leaving? Just like that? Yes? I said simply, just like that. I only fight for things that matter, Vanessa, and this marriage hasn't mattered to you for a long time. She opened her mouth to argue but couldn't find the words. I couldn't wait for her to come up with something. I picked up my bags, walked out the door, and didn't look back. Driving away felt surreal. Everything I'd worked for, everything I thought my life was supposed to be, was behind me, and yet I felt lighter. Not happy, yet, but free. The weight of Vanessa's betrayal, the constant doubts, the humiliation, it was all beginning to lift. That night, I checked into a hotel and spent the evening planning my next steps. My phone buzzed endlessly with messages from Vanessa. At first, they were angry. You're being ridiculous. You'll regret this. Then they turned manipulative. After everything I sacrificed for you, this is how you repay me. Finally, they became desperate. Daniel, please, let's talk. I can do better. I promise. I didn't respond. There was no point. Her safety net was gone. Over the next few days, I started putting my life back together. I found a small apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me. It was mine, and that was all I cared about. I threw myself into me work, focusing on the business that had always been my foundation. My colleagues noticed the change in me but didn't pry, which I appreciated. Meanwhile, Vanessa's life started falling apart. Mutual friends began reaching out to me, asking what had happened. Vanessa's telling people you abandoned her, one of them said. She says you left her with nothing. She's not wrong, I replied. I left her with exactly what she earned. Words spread quickly, and the image Vanessa had worked so hard to maintain began to crumble. Without access to my money, her lifestyle fell apart. The designer clothes, fancy dinners, and glamorous events, everything she built her life around, were gone, and with it, so was the facade of the person she pretended to be. Most of Vanessa's so-called friends vanished the moment her world started falling apart. I caught bits and pieces about her and Cameron through the grapevine, and it didn't take long for the shine of their affair to wear off. Without the comforts I had provided, Vanessa wasn't as alluring, and Cameron wasn't the knight in shining armor she'd convinced herself he was. Their relationship quickly turned sour, a mess of constant arguments and finger-pointing. It was poetic justice in its own way. She'd abandoned stability in search of excitement and ended up with nothing. One afternoon, Vanessa showed up at my office announced. When my assistant buzzed to let me know she was there, I was caught off guard. Still, curiosity got the better of me, and I told her to let Vanessa in. When she walked through the door, I barely recognized her. Gone was the confident, polished woman I'd once married. In her place stood someone who looked dull, tired, worn, and defeated. Daniel, she began softly, her voice lacking the boldness it once carried. Can we talk? I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. What do you want, Vanessa? She hesitated, her eyes darting around, as if she were searching for the right words. Finally, she said, I made a mistake. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I miss us. I almost laughed. Miss us? Really? You didn't seem to miss us when you were sneaking around with Cameron, or living off my money while lying to my face. Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But if she expected pity, she wasn't going to find it here. You have no idea how hard things have been for me, she said, her voice cracking. You're right, I replied, my tone sharp. And I don't care. You made your choices, Vanessa. Now you get to live with them. She didn't argue, turned and walked out. As I watched her leave, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Closure. She had taken so much from me. My trust, my love, my pride. But the one thing she couldn't take was the man I was becoming. Piece by piece, watching but what? Her walk away, I knew there was no going back as I focused on rebuilding my life. Vanessa's fantasy unraveled at breakneck speed. The dream life she thought she was chasing turned out to be nothing more than an illusion. To witness the fallout, but word got back to me anyway. People love a good scandal. "Have you heard about Vanessa and Cameron?" friends would ask, their voices laced with gossip and pity. I didn't ask for details, but the stories found their way to me all the same. Their relationship, built on lies and selfishness, crumbled under the weight of reality. The thrill of sneaking around was gone, and with it, any glue holding them together. Cameron, as it turned out, wasn't the man Vanessa had fantasized about. He'd been drawn to her for the life I had provided, mistaking her spending power for her worth. Without my financial support, Vanessa's world fell apart. The house, the credit cards, the luxuries, all of it was gone. She had no safety net, and Cameron had no patience for her struggles. I heard about one of their blowout fights through a mutual acquaintance. It was a scene, they said, shaking their head. Cameron was yelling about how she's nothing without your money. She stormed out crying for a fleeting moment. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. Vanessa's calls and texts started coming less frequently after that. When she did reach out, it wasn't to admit fault or apologize for what she'd done. It was always complaints about how hard her life had become. "Daniel, you don't know how much I'm struggling. Cameron and I had a fight. I don't know what to do. I made a mistake, please, can we talk? I need help." I never responded. There was no point. Vanessa wasn't looking for forgiveness. She was looking for a way back to the life she'd so carelessly thrown away. But I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't her safety net, her fallback plan, or her crutch. Over the next few months, things only got worse for her. I heard she moved out of the tiny apartment she and Cameron had shared after he kicked her out. Their relationship had turned toxic, with Cameron blaming her for their financial struggles and Vanessa accusing him of using her. Honestly, they were probably both right. One day, Jessica, the friend from the party, called me. I didn't know her well, but her voice carried hesitation as she spoke. "Daniel, I thought you should know. Vanessa's not doing well. She's staying on a friend's couch, and things are rough. Might be. You should talk to her." "Why?" I asked flatly. "She made her bed. Let her lie in it." Jessica didn't press, and I appreciated that. I wasn't interested in being Vanessa's savior. She had made it crystal clear that I wasn't enough for her when it mattered. I wasn't enough for her when it mattered. Going to let her rewrite that story now. Vanessa was finally learning the cost of the life she thought she wanted, and it was a price she couldn't afford. What struck me as both fascinating and darkly poetic was how much Cameron's behavior mirrored Vanessa's. Just as she had once taken me for granted, assuming I'd always be there no matter what, Cameron treated her the same way. He thought he could latch on to the remnants of her old life, enjoying the benefits without offering anything meaningful in return. When reality proved otherwise, he turned on her, exposing the shallow, self-serving man he really was. For all her flaws, Vanessa wasn't oblivious. She must have seen the parallels between Cameron's treatment of her and the way she had treated me. I wondered if she ever thought about that, while Cameron was tearing her down, berating her for not being the person he'd imagined. Did she notice the irony when she realized she had left a solid, stable relationship for someone who only cared about surface-level appearances? One night, Vanessa sent me a message that was different from the rest. It was longer, more personal, like something she had written in a moment of reflection and accidentally sent. "Daniel, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I can't stop thinking about what I did to us. Cameron wasn't who I thought he was, and I see now how blind I was. I threw away something good, something real, for nothing. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you I'm sorry. Truly, truly." I read it a few times, letting the words sink in. It wasn't defensive. There were no excuses, no attempts to shift the blame. For the first time, Vanessa sounded like someone who understood the gravity of her choices. But I didn't respond. Not because I was angry. By then, I wasn't. I'd moved past the bitterness and the hurt. I didn't reply because, ultimately, her apology didn't matter. It couldn't undo what had been done, couldn't rebuild trust, and couldn't bring me back to a place where I wanted her in my life. The truth was, her affair hadn't been the root cause of our downfall. It had been a symptom of something deeper, something broken in our relationship that neither of us had addressed. Vanessa had been chasing a fantasy, an idea of freedom and excitement that crumbled the moment reality set in. And I'd been holding on to someone incapable of valuing what we had. In the end, the affair had revealed the truth about both of us, and for that, I was strangely grateful. It gave me clarity, even if it came with pain. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Walking away from Vanessa and everything tied to her felt like stepping into the unknown with no idea where I'd land. But in that uncertainty, I found a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in years, my life was entirely my own, unburdened by lies, doubts, or the constant effort of holding something together that was already broken. Weeks were the hardest. My new apartment was silent, the kind of quiet that can feel almost oppressive when you're used to noise and routine. The little habits I had taken for granted, Sunday coffee mornings, late night movies on the couch, wear night movies on the couch, gone, replaced by an emptiness I didn't know how to fill. But over time, I realized that emptiness wasn't a loss. It was an opportunity, a blank slate waiting for me to start fresh. I channeled my energy into work, not to escape, but to rebuild. My business had always been a constant in my life, something I could control when everything else felt chaotic. Now it became the foundation of my new beginning. I poured long hours into it, not because I had to, but because I wanted to create something entirely my own, something untethered from Vanessa's shadow. But it wasn't all work. Slowly, I began rediscovering parts of myself that I'd neglected for years. I started going to the gym regularly, something I hadn't prioritized during the last stretch of my marriage. Every workout felt like a small triumph, a reminder that I could push through pain and come out stronger. Reclaiming my physical strength became a metaphor for reclaiming my emotional strength. I also reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with. At first, I wasn't sure how to explain what had happened, or if they'd even want to hear from me. But when I opened up, I discovered I wasn't alone. Many of them had their own stories of heartbreak and resilience, and their support became a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed. One friend, Tom, convinced me to join a hiking group he'd been part of for years. I wasn't much of an outdoorsman, but I decided to give it a shot. My first hike, standing at the summit and looking out over miles of untouched wilderness, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The mountains, unyielding and steady, reminded me that life goes on, no matter how broken you feel. Their quiet strength gave me perspective, something I desperately needed as I rebuilt my life. I started thinking about what I truly wanted, not just in a relationship, but in every aspect of life. For years, so much of my energy and identity had been tied up in Vanessa. Without her, I was finally free to figure out who I was and what made me happy. I tried things I never would have before. Cooking classes, photography, even picking up a guitar for the first time. Each new experience felt like a step toward discovering myself again. In the end, I wasn't just starting over, I was starting better. Vanessa's choices had shattered my old life, but they also gave me the freedom to build a new one that felt true to who I was and who I wanted to become. Some things stayed with me, others didn't. But every experience shaped me in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. And then there was Rachel. I met her at a networking event I almost talked myself out of attending. She stood by the refreshment table, quietly observing the room, looking slightly out of place, yet effortlessly radiant. There was no flashy entrance, no commanding presence like Vanessa used to have. Rachel's energy was calm, understated, and deeply magnetic in its simplicity. I struck up a conversation with her, and right away, I noticed how different she was. Rachel didn't try to impress me or monopolize the conversation. Instead, she listened, asked thoughtful questions, and spoke with a quiet sincerity that was rare. It wasn't one of those whirlwind, love at first sight moments. There were no fireworks or grand gestures, but there was something real, a quiet connection that deepened every time we spoke. We started seeing each other casually at first. A few dinner dates, some weekend hikes, and the occasional movie night. There was no rush, no urgency to fill a void or prove anything. It wasn't about replacing Vanessa. It wasn't about replacing Vanessa. About finding someone who valued me for who I was. Rachel didn't see me as a crutch or a source of stability. She saw me as a partner, someone worth knowing on my own terms. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the city skyline glow against the darkening sky, Rachel turned to me and said something that has stayed with me ever since. "You've been through a lot, but it doesn't define you. You're more than your past, Daniel." She was right. My time with Vanessa, for all its pain, was just one chapter in my life, not the whole story. With Rachel beside me, I finally felt ready to start a new chapter, one that I could write on my own terms. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just hopeful about love. I was hopeful about life. Losing so much had been painful, but in the process, I found something far more valuable: myself, and that realization was worth more than anything I had left behind. Meanwhile, Vanessa's life was falling apart. I wasn't surprised, honestly. I didn't wish it on her. It's not in my nature to take joy in someone else's suffering, but there was a certain grim satisfaction in knowing that she was finally confronting the consequences of her choices. Decisions she had made without a second thought about the fallout. The first whispers were small, casual comments from mutual acquaintances. "Vanessa's been staying with friends," one person mentioned over coffee. "She and Cameron broke up. She's struggling," another added. "She called me the other night crying." I don't think I've ever heard her sound so lost. At first, I brushed it off. It wasn't my responsibility anymore. Vanessa had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. But the stories kept coming, painting a clearer picture of her unraveling. Her breakup with Cameron, I heard, was messy. Their relationship, built on deception and the rush of forbidden excitement, crumbled under the weight of ordeal, everyday reality. Without my financial support, Vanessa's once glamorous lifestyle was no longer sustainable. What had made her appealing to Cameron, the image of wealth and status, disappeared, and once that illusion was gone, so was his patience. Their arguments became public and vicious. One acquaintance recounted a particularly ugly fight where Cameron reportedly shouted, "You're nothing without Daniel's money." It was cruel, but undeniably true. Vanessa had no rebuttal because, for the first time, she was facing a truth she couldn't escape. With no stable income, no home of her own, and no loyal friends to lean on, Vanessa was adrift. The same people who had crowded around her at parties and events now ignored her calls. Then one day, I got a call from a mutual friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Her voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. "Daniel, I thought you should know. Vanessa's not doing well. She's staying with someone, but it's not a permanent situation. She's struggling, financially, emotionally, in every way." I listened as she described Vanessa's struggles. Her mounting debt, the sleepless nights, the growing debt, the sleepless nights, the growing realization that Cameron had never loved her. When the friend finally paused, I asked, "What do you expect me to do about it?" "I don't know," she said quietly. "Maybe just reach out." She seemed so lost. Lost, that word hung in the air. Vanessa had been lost for a long time, long before Cameron, long before the cracks in our marriage became undeniable. But finding her way back wasn't my responsibility anymore. I told the friend as much, as kindly as I could. "I've moved on," I said. "Vanessa has to figure this out on her own." The calls, the rumors, the occasional updates, they didn't affect me. My focus was on building a life that wasn't tied to the wreckage of my past. But as time went on, I couldn't help reflecting on the lessons I'd learned from that chapter of my life. The most important lesson was about self-worth. For 4 years, I'd let Vanessa's approval, lack of it, shape how I saw myself. I twisted myself into knots trying to meet her expectations, constantly seeking validation that never came. But the truth was, I'd always been enough. I just hadn't realized it until I walked away. The second lesson was about love. Real love isn't about appearances or convenience. It's built on trust, respect, and effort from both people. Vanessa had loved the idea of me, the stability, the success, but not the person behind it. Rachel, on the other hand, saw me for who I truly was and valued me for it. That difference was everything. Some experiences stay with you forever, others fade with time.